I have a quiz for you. What was used by the samurai to power up in a world of chaos? What obsessed the Japanese people so much that they would gamble fortunes on it to the extent where it had to be banned by law? What sparked the conservative revolution in Japan, which was a complete rejection to the Chinese influence at that time? What moved armies and built trust in a period of war where nothing else could be trusted? What was so valuable that it was carried over 500 kilometers or 300 miles in parades all the way to the shogun that lasted for about 2 weeks? I bet you wouldn't have a clue if it wasn't for the title of this video. Yes, it's matcha. For those of you who think that this current matcha boom is an anomaly, well, for us Japanese, we know it isn't, because Japan's been through this before. History repeats itself. Japan not only went through it once, it went through it 5 times. 5. So today, we'll peel back these untold stories of matcha. The buried stories behind the zen and the health benefits that we know of matcha today. This is the history of matcha. And in this channel, as always, we talk about stories that you can't find anywhere else. So make sure you save this video, go and grab a cup of Japanese green tea, sit back and relax, and let's dive into this first chapter of this fascinating drink. The first chapter we're going to talk about is the doping of the samurai. Hi, I'm Yuki, I'm the founder of Tea Life, and here we break down Japanese tea so you can become a Japanese tea expert. Some stories just have to be told in depth, and that's what we're going to do today. So welcome to the first episode of Overbrewed by Yuki. Samurai doping. That sounds kind of frightening, so what am I talking about here? Let's turn back the clock. Let's rewind about 800 years, and let's go to the year 1187. This was the year when a Zen monk named Eisai, he introduced a form of matcha to Japan. He brought it from China, and back then it wasn't exactly matcha, it was an ancestor of matcha. But to truly understand the significance of this and why this actually became a boom, we really have to understand the historical backdrop of this. It was essentially the era of the rise of the samurai. Now back then, Japan was in a huge state of change. It was the end of the Heian period, and it was the beginning of the Kamakura period. Now I know this sounds like super boring history. Don't worry, I'm gonna make it super simple for you. It's gonna be super easy, I promise. The Heian period lasted about 400 years, and it was relatively stable. Relatively. It was centered around the imperial court in Kyoto, around the emperor, and this was an age when culture in Japan really flourished. The interesting thing about this era is that the elites here, they had political power and cultural power. However, they didn't really have military strength. So to manage the distant lands, they had to rely on local warriors. And these were the early samurai. And these samurais, they eventually gained power. Over time, the structure became more and more unstable. And the main reason was because of the insane politics. It became insanely political. It was kind of like, for example, emperors, they would step down and become monks and still continue to reign from behind the scenes. The reason they would do this is because that way they can even more freely reign the world, which obviously is a horrible idea from the people's perspective. The emperors would become so powerful that they can force current emperors to abdicate so they can appoint new ones for more control. And these newer emperors, they would be like kids or teenagers. But what this also created was lots of ex-emperors with their own influence and with their own agendas. Yeah, so it's pretty bad. Authority was obviously no longer clear. It was split between emperors, ex-emperors, regents, aristocrats. They were all fighting for influence, but also, frankly, their lives as well. It was really the world of Game of Thrones. Hidden power, multiple factions, lots of constant maneuvering. This obviously, as you may expect, led to conflict. Now you may have heard the famous clans Heike and Genji. These two clans were in the center of this turmoil. The Heike and the Genji clans were of warrior classes. The Heike clans were exactly like the Lannisters. They would become very powerful by entrenching themselves into the imperial court. Sometimes they would become so powerful that they would actually have more influence than the emperor himself. Now, on the other hand, the Genji clans, they were more like the Starks. They would distance themselves from the capital, they would be up north, and they would slowly build power. They become so powerful that after a while, it was impossible for the Heike to ignore. Now, this obviously led to conflict, and after years of battle, the Genji won out. And that's why the Genji, they established the first military government in Japan. This was the Kamakura shogunate. This was also a time when people were starting to get drawn to new forms of Buddhism. As you can imagine, with so many ex-emperors becoming monks and pulling strings from behind the scenes, religion started to become so political and so elite controlled that I'd imagine that people started to lose interest in that. And it was in this exact moment of transition when military strength became everything and people were starting to look for new forms of religion that Eisai brought back from China Zen and tea. Now, the tea that Eisai brought back from China wasn't exactly matcha. I'd say it's an ancestor of matcha. There are some similarities. It was steamed, first of all, and then it was compressed into balls and dried. And then before you drank it, it was shaved into powder. And then you would mix it with water. So there are some similarities. However, the tea back then, it wasn't shaded, it wasn't deveined, and the powder was likely much more coarser than what we have today. So it's safe to say it's probably extremely astringent, extremely bitter. I don't think it's really pleasant to drink. It's very unlike the current matcha that we have right now, full of umami and sweetness. So I think this tea is quite repelling. After all, it's a form of tea that died in China. The question is, why did it stick in Japan then? There's an important reason for this. I talk about Eisai in this channel quite a fair bit, so you might have the impression that Eisai is famous for bringing tea from China to Japan. But actually, he's not. He's actually more famous for bringing Zen Buddhism into Japan. He's actually a very famous figure in Japanese history. And as a part of the Zen Buddhism, there was tea. And Zen quickly spread to the samurai, in a world again where military strength was everything. But why did the samurai accept Zen so much? The reason was because, not for abstract philosophical reasons, it was more practical. The samurai loved Zen because they thought that Zen would make them stronger. Zen trained the mind. It helped them to stay calm under pressure, be able to move without hesitation, and stay focused when it's life or death situations. And within that Zen, tea was a part of it. Tea supported that. So tea would help you stay alert. It would help you stay focused. It would support long hours of training and meditation. So I'd say that tea back then to the samurai was kind of like spinach to Popeye the Sailor Man. Tea wasn't about just taste. It was about performance. Also, let's think of the alternative drinks back then, drunk by the samurai. What else would there be? There would be sake, of course, and probably samurai would drink sake a lot. However, obviously it's alcohol, so it's not exactly something that improves your performance. It doesn't really train the mind. If anything, it would lower the performance. What else is there? There would be water, of course, but it's not like now where all the water facilities are well made. It has the risk of contamination unless it's well boiled. What else? There would be barley tea. That did exist from back then. But basically, you get the point, right? There's not too many competitors to tea that would be suitable for the samurai. So no wonder this form of tea died in China, but it was embraced by Japan. So in this way, this was samurai doping. It was the performance enhancement drug, PED. And with science these days, we know that it wasn't just a gimmick, it was actually something, because we know that the combination of caffeine and L-theanine in the tea, it helps the sense of calm alertness. It helps the performance. Also know that the caffeine helps endurance and reduce fatigue as well. There are scientific studies where if people drink green tea, it actually enhances their athletic performance as well. So certainly they were onto something back then. As the samurai sharpened their swords, tea sharpened their minds, because for them it was a life or death situation. Zen Buddhism became the mainstream of samurai elites, and with it came tea. And this, matcha doping, was the first matcha boom. Hold on to your seats though, because this story about focus and performance is about to make an insane turn to the opposite direction. The second matcha boom is about gambling and extravagance. Fast forward roughly 200 years, and it's 1360 right now. The Kamakura shogunate has already fallen, and Japan is in the era of unrest again. Let's play a game. We have 3 cups of tea on the trusty box that I always use. I hope you can see them. Now, honcha ka hicha ka. One is honcha, the real tea. The others are hicha, not the real tea. Your job is to guess which is honcha. Most of the time, in this game, real tea referred to tea that comes from the Togano area. Togano is an area in the outskirts of Kyoto, and it was considered the first area to produce premium Japanese tea. So the idea of this game is to drink each of the cups, and with your taste buds, with your advanced taste buds, be able to decide which ones are from Kyoto, from Togano, and which ones are not. So that's how this game goes. I will give it a go. 1の茶。うん、うん、2の茶。うん、3の茶。うん、1、本茶と酢。2、ひ茶と酢。3、ひ茶と酢。どうだ？参った。Now that was a form of gamble, so with that loss, I actually lost an equivalent of almost 100K in modern rates. That's a lot of money to lose. I obviously can't pay for that, so I need your help in liking and subscribing and sharing and commenting and all that good stuff to this video. Anyways, what you just witnessed right now was something called tocha. It's kind of like a tea contest. Now, obviously, that's not exactly how it happened, but the essence was basically something like that. Tocha began to spread in Japan around the 14th century. This was the Muromachi period of Japan. It originally came from China, so the game itself was from China. However, it's a little bit different the way it was done in China. China was more judging the different qualities of the tea. However, in Japan, it evolved into more of a contest where it tests you whether or not you can tell the difference of high quality tea. Over time, it evolved further into gambling. People weren't playing just for fun, they bet really serious stakes on this, just like the way I did just now. It was everything online. And it wasn't some just niche movement. It was spreading all across the samurai elites all over Japan. Big gatherings, lots of people, serious stakes. Because the gambling got so intense and so out of hand, the authorities tried to crack down on this. Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, in the late 1300s, he actually banned it. Now, a very interesting detail that's very important for us tea enthusiasts is the term that they use in tocha. They used honcha and hicha. Honcha meaning real tea and hicha meaning not real tea. And again, the honcha usually referred to the tea from Togano. That was initially, but as the years went on, Uji started to make really good quality tea as well. And Uji also started to become honcha. So Togano and eventually Uji were the honcha, and the others were the hicha. Which tells us something very important. It tells us that not all tea at this point in time tastes the same. It means that Uji and Togano, they started to establish themselves as benchmark for quality at this point in time. It means that From compared to the Eisai days, the taste of the tea has improved. For those of you who follow this channel would know what Uji tea is. Uji tea is tea from the Kyoto area. Now, back in the days, back in the Tocha days, I think the meaning was a little bit more tight. I think it meant the teas specifically in the Uji region of Kyoto. However, nonetheless, this is the start of Uji tea, and it has become the gold standard of Japanese tea ever since. Now, let's think about the quality of the tea here just a minute. When you think about it, the shading hasn't really started yet, back in the days. The deveining of the tea leaves haven't started yet either, so there is a little bit of a difference between the matcha that we drink now to the matcha that was drunk previously at this point in time. However, compared to the Eisai days, there's a lot of advancements in terms of the quality. This was brought through improvements in cultivation, improvements in steaming and the drying methodologies. Also, there's a lot more stone mills by this time, so although not as fine as what we have it right now, the powder was a lot more finer than what it was previously. So while not nearly as delicious as the matcha we have today, and although it doesn't really fit the proper definition of matcha currently we have, there was still a huge improvement in terms of the quality and the taste compared to the days of Eisai across the 200 years. However, to me, this still doesn't really explain how this became a craze. What was behind this craze over tea? So here's the thing, back in the days, it felt like there was something very similar to the American dream for the samurai. It was, in a sense, the samurai dream. It felt like suddenly you could rise, if you can be strong and win in battles, then you can suddenly gain money and power and fame and even land by doing so. So as the Kamakura shogunate fell apart and Japan went into chaos, then after all of that, you ended up with this wave of samurai who lived through that chaos and basically made it. These guys were rich, but weren't exactly aristocrats, so they didn't grow up with a sense of culture or refined culture the way that the court nobles did. They were, in a sense, the nouveau riche. New power, new money. So naturally, they spent. They spent a lot of money on lots of different flashy things, on parties, on showing off, things like that. And this kind of people, this activity was also referred to as basara. Basara might be a term you've heard before through certain games, but that's what it is. And if you want to see what this looks like in real life, then look no further than a man called Sasaki Doyo. He was the embodiment of the Basara Lord. He wasn't just a powerful samurai, he was known for going big. He would host large gatherings with dozens of people, not quiet tea sessions, but full banquets with food, alcohol, music, poetry. The rooms will be filled with expensive Chinese objects and tea utensils and anything that basically signaled wealth and taste. And back then, expensive stuff basically meant that there were stuff that were imported from China. They were so well made, so beautiful, so glam, so expensive. And in the center of it all was tocha. The stakes weren't small. People were betting huge amounts of money, sometimes even weapons and land as well. So imagine being in that room, the tea is served, everyone is watching, and you have to decide which is honcha, which is not. All the pressure. Damn, you drink each one. They all taste good. They all taste good. If you're right, you win. If you're wrong, you lose basically everything. The clock's ticking. That pressure, that attention, that's what really made tocha so addictive. And people like Sasaki are a big reason why this spread the way it did. But wait a minute, you might say. This tocha culture, it doesn't really feel and fit the Japanese tea culture that I really understand. How is it so different? Exactly. This is because matcha, the Japanese tea culture, it makes another 180 degrees pivot to the opposite direction. Let's fast forward another 200 years. This is the year 1540. This is the third matcha boom. After tocha, tea didn't really disappear. It remained an elite culture. It wasn't gambling anymore. It wasn't a competition. However, it was a show. It was a show of expensive utensils. It was a show of glam. It was a show of displaying expensive Chinese objects so people can see. Remember, Chinese still remains the gold standard here. There was a true admiration from the Japanese towards the advanced Chinese culture. So tea became, in many ways, a way to use these precious objects, to display them, to show taste through what you've owned. Then there was this movement that basically said that, hold on a second, made in Japan? This is damn good too. And this was a complete new way of thinking back then. This was driven by a man named Takeno. Let's talk about Takeno for a minute because this guy was interesting. He was one of the main people that wabicha, the concept of wabicha, was credited to. And wabicha is basically the style of Japanese tea ceremony that is practiced till this day. He was a merchant. He was not a samurai or an elite, which is significant because merchants don't rely on power. They rely on taste, culture, relationships, and it basically put tea in the context of becoming a social language. Now, back then at this time, there was another thing that was extremely important to the Japanese culture, and it was the waka. Waka is written Japanese songs, and it's basically a short form poetry of 31 syllables. Just 31 syllables. So, because it's so short, each of these syllables, each of the words you use in this poem becomes extremely important, extremely high context, and extremely deep. It was amazing because what you can basically do with these 31 syllables, you can convey huge, complete sceneries extremely vividly with just these 31 syllables. It was super duper deep. So Waka was a way to show your knowledge, your intelligence, your sense of taste as well. So people would send Waka to their loved ones as love letters. And if you get a Waka right back, then maybe it's a form of acceptance. There were even games. There were competitions like a Renga, which is kind of like a linked poetry. You say a first part, and then the other person says the rest of the poetry. So you link it up. It's kind of like the Japanese version of the rap battle in a sense. So, and there's a scene that I can never forget. There's a samurai in a battlefield about to be killed. So he lost his own weapon, and the enemy samurai, he has a sword like this about to slash him. And then as he understands the near of his death, he recites his waka. And the waka moves the samurai so much, the enemy samurai so much, that he decides to let him go. Something like that. So waka was a huge part of Japanese culture. It was a very important part of Japanese culture. And come to think of it, it might be similar to what TikTok is right now, because it's a form of self-expression in a very, clear and clever way. And although there are no likes or shares or things like that we have right now, there was a level of appreciation for a good piece of waka. And the essence of this art is, again, that it's very high context. It's not about saying more, it's about saying less and yet conveying more within those 31 syllables. It's about addition through subtraction. This is the world that Takenojo really loved. He takes this mindset and he brings it into tea. So that way, tea starts to change. Sometimes instead of a large hall, maybe a small room might be better for tea. It's more closer, more intimate, feels more special. Sometimes rather than a very expensive Chinese bowl, a Japanese rustic bowl might fit the moment better, like matching the bowl with autumn leaves. Tea stops becoming what you have, and instead it becomes how things come together. All the different parts, the tea, the room, the utensils, the experience, they all come together to complete a form of art. And that spread among the elites. I really love this direction, by the way. Now, what was the matcha like in this period? You might be wondering if it's still that same kind of repelling stuff that we talked about previously. Actually, the matcha in this period of time has come a long ways. It's very similar to the type of matcha that we drink today. The matcha is now shaded before harvesting, so it creates that deep umami and the sweetness, and it reduces the astringency and the bitterness. And then it has the vibrant green colors as well. So that's very close. We also destemmed and deveined the tea leaves before processing, so that's done. And then the powder is grounded into extremely fine form. So essentially, it fits the current definition of matcha already. Now, obviously, there's not the refined matcha that we have today, so the selection of cultivars are still different. The technologies behind shading and then the cultivation and the processing, this is all still in the back in the days, so a little bit different as well. However, in terms of the basics, we're already there. So I would assume that it's already pretty good matcha. Another important point was at the center of all of this was Uji. Uji, by this time, has really established itself as the premium place to make matcha. If you're looking for great matcha, then you look no further than Uji. So by this point, matcha is ready. The form, the culture, it's all ready. Next comes the person who changes everything, Sennorikyu. Next comes the fourth boom of matcha. But before we get there, I need a sip of Japanese tea. Excuse me. Okay, let's move forward. A few more decades forward, Japan has entered the Warring States period, where all the warlords are fighting over each other for power and land. Now, all the Japanese boys, they love this era because all their heroes are from this era. Oda Nobunaga, Sanada Yukimura, Takeda Shingen, Uesugi Kenshin, Date Masamune. The list goes on and on. Anyways, even on these battlefields, they had tea gatherings. Yeah. And not only that, they carried with them extremely precious pieces of tea utensils. Things are so expensive, so precious, that they can actually be exchanged for entire castles. That's how precious these tea utensils became. That's kind of insane, right? Why would you bring such expensive and precious and fragile tea utensils to a battlefield? But think about this. This is a world where you're not sure if you're going to be alive tomorrow. You're killing people every day, and every single day you have your close people being killed as well. In a sense, you need something to bring peace and sanity to the mind. So tea wasn't really just a drink. You can say it was like a drug. It was a drug so that you can become human again. And that is why tea became so powerful. Okay, I want you to help me out with an exercise. I want you to follow exactly what I say. I want you to close your eyes and carefully and vividly as possible imagine what I say. Okay, you're a lord of a small domain in this era of the warring states. You're surrounded by uncertainty. You're battling every day. Again, you're not sure if you're going to be alive tomorrow. One day you'll receive a message. It's an invitation. It's an invitation from none other than Nobunaga Oda. Now, this Nobunaga Oda, he is probably the most powerful warlord in Japan at this point in time. He's probably the closest person to conquering, unifying Japan. At this point, you're unsure whether he is friend or foe. You receive an invitation, and he's asking you to join him for tea. You enter the tea room. There's only two other people inside. It's an extremely exclusive club. One is a diminutive figure. It's Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He's a rising force. He will eventually unify Japan, and he is someone you cannot ignore. The other is a big figure. He's a tall figure for Japanese standards. He's about 180 centimeters, about 5 feet 11. He looks kind of like a Zen monk. It's Sen Norikyu. He's the CTO, the chief tea officer, if you will, to Oda Nobunaga. You feel their presence. You feel the weight of the room. You swallow and quietly take your seat. In the tea room is a different atmosphere. No weapons, no armor, no battlefield. It's a stark contrast to the reality we live in. It's just silence, except for the kettle boiling. You notice something. You notice the tea caddy, the chaire. It's not an ordinary one. You squint your eyes. It's a masterpiece. No, it cannot be. Yes, it is. It's the Hatsuhana Katatsuki. It's a masterpiece. It's a meibutsu. It's a named treasure. one that is so precious and so valuable that it could be exchanged for an entire castle. Oda Nobunaga is using this for you. You've heard about this piece before, but you never thought you'd be able to have the chance to see it in your entire life. Not only are you seeing this, Oda Nobunaga is taking your tea from this legendary item. Then the gesture, Oda Nobunaga himself, he's preparing the tea. He's preparing the tea for you, and he's serving it to you. You accept the tea and drink it, and think to yourself, this is not just tea. This is recognition. This is saying that you matter. Oof. In a world where nothing can be trusted, no alliances, no promises, he created something very rare. It created trust, and it created a bond. Okay, how was that? You can open your eyes now. I hope that was interesting, and I hope that gives you a sense of how important tea was back in the days during the era of battle. Now, Oda Nobunaga, he was really actively strategically using tea as a ways to enhance the loyalty and trust of his generals. He allowed tea to be practiced based on permission. So if you're able to prove your worth in a battlefield, then he would grant you permission to practice tea, and that would be a huge honor. And not only that, Oda Nobunaga, he would collect the most precious pieces of teaware and tea utensils. And one of those tea utensils is the one that you just saw, the Hatsuhana Katatsuki. That was a very famous tea caddy. Not only he would collect them, he would actually also take them and grant them to his generals, and that will increase the loyalty and the trust of those generals significantly. If you ever played the game Nobunaga's Ambition, Nobunaga no Yabo, I think it was by Koei, I'm not sure, I might be mistaken, but it was a simulation game of the Warring States period in Japan. It's an old game, but it was a great game. I used to love it. And I don't know how old I was. I don't want to age myself either. But anyways, in that game, you can give a general a tea utensil, like a teapot or something. And when you do that, his loyalty like boosts significantly, like 2 digits. Boom, something like that. Back in the day when I was a kid, I didn't really understand why that was that way, because these generals are like absolute terror. They're monsters on the battlefield, and why would they care for like a teapot like this? But now it made perfect sense. I hope it makes sense to you too. Indeed, tea was a weapon that could move armies. Now, the man that you just saw in the room with Oda Nobunaga, do you remember not the diminutive one, that's Hideyoshi. The other one, I said he was tall and he looked like a Zen monk like CTO? That's Sennorikyu, and he is no ordinary man. He's the person who established the wabicha. I say that he kind of reinvented the T in a way that Steve Jobs reinvented the phone. The T was already there. Wabicha, the concept was already there by Takeno Joel, but he took those and elevated to an entirely new level. Remember Takeno Joel? He was basically saying that, the Chinese stuff, they're awesome, they're really nice, but the Japanese stuff, the made in Japans, these are really good as well. They're both really good. That's what Takeno Joel said. Sennorikyu, he took it one step further. He said, actually, Japanese stuff made in Japan, these are even better than Chinese stuff. That's essentially what he did. He took concepts like simplicity, space, silence, and he really pushed it to the extreme. And I'll give you some examples. His tea rooms were extremely small. There were only 2 tatami mat sizes, which is about 3 square meters, 3 square yards as well. It was barely enough space to move. The entrances were so small that you had to actually duck and crawl inside. You have to lower your head and bow to get into the tea room. But think about this. The room is so tiny that it removes the space. It removes the space and brings you so much closer to the other person. Because the entrance is so tiny, you have to lower your head, and it removes the hierarchy. It removes the ego. Inside the tea room, there's nothing extra. No decorations for the sake of decorations, no distractions, no noise. There's just a scroll, a flower, some tea utensils, and each one of these pieces are carefully chosen to convey a message to the guest. That's all. Everything inside was intentional. That's what Riku created. He didn't just make tea, he designed the human interaction. Designing human interaction, what does that mean? Now let me share a story, a famous story about Sen Norikyu and Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Yeah, Hideyoshi is the other guy that you met at Oda's place. He was the diminutive guy. But this was much later in history. This is after Oda had died, and Hideyoshi has become the effective unifier of Japan already. Now, one day, Hideyoshi hears that Sen Norikyu had grown a garden of beautiful morning glories, beautiful flowers in full bloom. He wants to see them, so he decides to pay a visit. Now, when he reaches the gardens, when he reaches Sen Norikyu's place, he notices that the garden is empty. All the morning glories have been cut. Now, this is absurd. Why would you remove the very thing a very precious guest has come to see? He walks into the tea room, and in there, in the tea room, placed quietly inside, he sees one fabulous morning glory. Hideyoshi sees one flower, and because everything else is already gone, that one flower becomes impossible to ignore. Its color, its shape, its presence, it fills the room. Now, Rikyu didn't move the flowers. He didn't cut the flowers so Hideyoshi couldn't see them. He cut the flowers so Hideyoshi can truly see the beauty of the morning glory. And now it has become an unforgettable experience for Hideyoshi. That's how Rikyu designed experience. By taking things away, what remained became even more powerful. And by doing so, he made each interaction very special. And that's how he designed human connection. His tea and philosophy spread, and from this, the Chanoyu, the practice of tea, it really became a boom. Now let's look into some of the more tangible stuff that he did to create this boom. Now, one of the most important things that Rikyu had established was called the So-an tea room. These were very small spaces, very humble spaces that really embodied the essence of wabi-cha. These were very different from the old, large, and formal tea rooms of the past. They were, again, small and compact, and they were made from natural materials. These were even smaller than the modest tea rooms that Joe had created in the past. And you didn't really need to be wealthy or have status in order to build them. And because of that, tea became more accessible. At the same time, under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, tea started to spread even more rapidly. Hideyoshi understood tea's power. He understood it not as just culture, but also as influence. He, with Rikyu at his side, hosted large-scale gatherings, inviting lots of people from different levels of societies to join. Some were highly exclusive, and others were open and expansive. Through these, tea really spread. Hideyoshi hosted, and Rikyu shaped the experience. There's another important layer to this. At his core, Sen no Rikyu, he's actually a merchant from Sakai. Sakai is a town, it's a city of trade and merchants and money. Sen no Rikyu moved a lot of money. And one of the reasons why Oda Nobunaga, he trusted Sen no Rikyu so much in the first place was his eye. He could evaluate tea utensils. He knew what's valuable and he knew what's not. Now then, obviously, something happened to Oda. He died. In 1582, the famous Honnoji no Hen, or the incident of Honnoji, there Oda Nobunaga's power collapsed. And with it, many of the most prized meibutsu teaware and tea utensils had gone to ashes as well. A huge portion of what defined value in tea in Japan had disappeared instantaneously. This created a vacuum, and Rikyu decided to step in to fill that void. Using his authority as an evaluator, he started to recognize value for not only for the Chinese product that came from overseas, but also for Japanese-made products. These were products that were probably overlooked in the past. For example, like the hand-shaped bowls that we call raku, simple, asymmetrical, nothing really fancy. Rikyu would price them magnificently, and with the backing of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the pricing would become reality. A new type of tea culture has begun to rise. It was a tea culture that wasn't dependent on rare imports from China. Now, today we'll stop talking about Senno here. However, we've only really scratched the surface about what he has contributed, so maybe in the future we'll talk a bit about him a little bit more. But nonetheless, his movement contributed to leading to another great movement, another great boom of matcha in Japan. This is the fifth matcha boom we'll talk about today. It's the weapon of control. Let's fast forward a few decades. It's the 1600s, it's the early 1600s. And let's say you're visiting the old town Odawara. Now, back then, obviously, it's not that old yet, but it's a post town on the Tokaido. The Tokaido is a major route that connects Kyoto and Edo, which is around Tokyo. The Tokaido is still a major route. You might know the Tokaido Shinkansen, the Tokaido Sen. These are all going through the Tokaido. It's a fine mid-May morning. On a day like this, you can see the magnificent Mount Fuji in the distance. It's beautiful. It's huge. And then you notice something. Oh, what's that over there? A row of dozens, maybe more than 100 people. It's a procession. Oh wow, maybe it's a daimyo, a regional lord bringing tribute to the shogun, maybe with gold and weaponry. Let's take a look. So you go over and take a look, and where's the daimyo? It's not really a daimyo. In the center, there's this. What is that? It's a huge container. It's a sealed. It's a teapot. What's going on? All right, so let me explain the era we're in right now. The wars are finally over. The battlefields are quiet, and for the first time in several generations, it seems like there's peace. Japan is no longer tearing itself apart. Tokugawa Ieyasu has won, and the Tokugawa shogunate has begun. What follows is not just peace, but it was one of the longest sustained periods of stability in Japanese history. The Tokugawa shogunate started in 1603 and lasted until 1868. That's over 260 years of stability. That level of control was not maintained by force alone, it was maintained by systems. And interestingly, tea was a part of that system. History sure is funny. As the political landscape changes, so does the role of tea. As we talked about, it used to be a tool to create relationships, but now it's become a tool to control the masses. In an era without constant warfare, the role of the samurai had to be redefined. They couldn't be primarily fighters anymore, there's nothing to fight about. Instead, they had to become administrators and officials and enforcers of law. What replaced battlefield training was behavioral discipline. And the Chanoyu, the teaching of the tea, became a training ground for that. Every aspect of the tea gathering is structured. The layout of the rooms, the sequence of the movements, the timing of the actions, the handling of the utensils. There's no space for improvisation. Learning tea was not about creativity. It was about learning and mastering predefined forms and executing them perfectly, flawlessly, with precision. In that sense, it was very similar to some of the martial arts kata that Japanese practice as well, like kendo or judo, aikido, karate-do, kyudo, any of these. Chado, or the way of tea, they followed these precise rules as well. It trained the body and mind to operate within strict boundaries, reinforcing habits of control, awareness, and obedience. Matcha became a weapon of control. They didn't only control the samurai, though, they extended the control to production. Yes, so control extended beyond behavior. It controlled the tea production system itself. By this time, the farmers have already understood, or have already realized that by shading the tea leaves from the sun before harvesting, you can create quality tea leaves. It increases the sweetness, the umami, reduces the astringency and the bitterness, and it creates tea leaves that make delicious matcha. So the tea farms already know this, and this was called shading, obviously. However, this wasn't allowed to be practiced by all the farmers. Creating quality tea was restricted. Can you believe that? If you were a farm making tea, chances were that you weren't allowed to shade them. Shading wasn't allowed except for one certain area in Japan. You guessed it, it's the Uji area. Because Uji was so closely tied to political and cultural power, they had this kind of a protected status. They were allowed to produce great quality tea. It was highly political. I'm guessing that you might have had a aha moment at this point in time. Yes, if you were wondering why Uji was so advanced and so ahead of other areas, this was one of the reasons. It was very strongly protected for political reasons. And then there was something that's even more visible. The finest tea of Japan every year would begin a journey. It would start from Uji, naturally because that's the only place that was permitted to create great quality tea, and make a journey all the way up to Edo, where the shogun was. And yes, that's the one you saw at Old Town Odawara. It's called the Otsubo Dochu. Large ceramic jars filled with freshly produced tea from Uji would be transported all the way to Edo, which is modern-day Tokyo. But this wasn't just transportation. As we witness, it was almost like a Disneyland parade. The journey covered about 500 kilometers, or more than 300 miles, and the journey would last about 2 weeks. The jars would be accompanied by officials and guards, and they would go slowly through different towns and villages, and everywhere they went, people would come to watch. Now, for the sake of the tea, I would have wished that they would move a little bit faster. 2 weeks is quite long, and it's not like they're sitting in aircon conditioned cars or anything. It's May when the Otsubo Dochu takes place, so it's getting quite hot. And I'm worried that the precious tea that's meant to be served to the shogun is enduring a fair bit of oxidation. But that's obviously neither here nor there. Anyways, it wasn't just the tea being delivered, it was the shogunate on display. Like a parade, it showed something very clearly. It showed that it moved under the control of the Tokugawa. So as such, the fifth boom was when tea became a part of the shogunate system. So those were the 5 booms, my 5 booms of matcha, and right now we're in the 6th boom of matcha all over the world. Honestly, I don't think I've ever spoken so much in my entire life. One thing I wanted to say to all the listeners was that we're such a small channel. As you can see, there's no production budget. So instead, what we try to do is we try to dive deep into the information. We try to find information that you can't find anywhere else on YouTube or the internet. What this does is it makes the information really, really niche, and it's not for everyone. But that's why I'm really appreciative of you coming in and watching. Just watching is already amazing. If you have a like or a comment, that's even more amazing. It really is. I genuinely want to thank you for that, and I want you to encourage you to stick around more. If you manage to somehow watch until the end of this, I think it's going to be a very long video, then thank you so much again. Can you leave a comment, maybe tell me which story maybe left an impression on you today? Okay, thanks so much. I'm going to rest my voice now. See you soon.